Hello, my name is Claire Weber and I am presenting my presentation on teaching to diverse abilities. This fits under the theme of teaching to diverse learners. I chose to narrow it down to every student's academic ability. The questions that I asked are based on what I'm asking myself as a teacher every day. As a teacher, I'm asking which students am I missing? Who is not getting it? I'm asking what knowledge, skills, and strategies can I use to reach all students? And I'm also asking how can I use that knowledge of my students' ability to shape my future instruction? All of this leads me to my competency statement, which is I am confident that I can enable students to learn most effectively by differentiating my instruction based on my knowledge of each student's development and growth. I want to bring us way back to my very first practicum. It's not on my board because I tried really hard to try and find my lesson and I can't find it anywhere. But I remember what I did, and I was at a first grade classroom at Sheridan Elementary the spring of 2014, so my freshman year. And I had to teach a lesson on adding and subtracting two-digit numbers to first graders for the very first time. And when I did that lesson, I only planned how to do it one way. I didn't think about it any other way. I basically was trying to get through my very first lesson. And it was a total flop. They didn't understand it, and I didn't know another way to teach it. And basically, I'm pretty sure my cooperating teacher had to revisit this lesson that I had taught the next day. So I moved on from it, but basically what I took away from it is from a very early stage in my college undergraduate career, I learned that teaching is about teaching multiple ways. Which brings me to my first piece of evidence on our board. I'm going to bring us to my math practicum of fall 2015 at Cahill Elementary. In this lesson, I planned for the unexpected. I planned to gear up and I planned to gear down. So for my advanced students, I gave them an additional assignment. The lesson I was teaching was about probability, and it involved getting a package of Skittles and figuring out the ratios between the different colors that they had. And I knew that they would probably get through it pretty fast. So I gave them an additional assignment that was a quick check, and it was the same topic, but instead it was using a spinner and talking about how many times the spinner would land on a certain part on the spinner. And then for my gear down, I just pretty much simplified my questions for the students. I wanted them to be able to complete the assignment everyone was completing, but I gave them simpler questions to get them to understand and get to where they needed to be. And then in addition, I noted that I would be moving around the room. It's important that as a teacher, you're present every single moment. You can't teach from your seat. And so one of the biggest ways I think you can differentiate is by working individually with the student. So even if that's just 1 minute with the student, that is going to mean a lot of difference to the student. Moving on, I'm going to talk quite a bit about this whole side of the board. My reading and writing disabilities course I took in the fall of 2016. This was at the Kit and Dick Smoker Reading Center. I was paired with a student who had cortical visual impairment and cognitive delay. She was 8 years old. The class was set up in a way that it gave you a lot of resources to use, and it guided you through how to basically tutor a student who was behind in reading and writing. But my student wasn't able to do what they wanted me to do with her. So I learned very early on that I couldn't do the things they were telling me to do, and I had to come up with my own instruction. So it was a trial and error semester, but I learned so much from it. I started learning about what she could do, and I viewed her strengths as a way for me to shape my instruction. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is my sight word. So this girl was learning basically letter recognition, sight words, letter writing, and then a whole word reading approach. We're at the very beginning stages of reading. So I first started by giving her a card that had the word can, and that didn't work very well. I did that for a couple lessons, and she wasn't really remembering that this was the word can. So I realized I need to add something. How can I get her to remember it? So I chose to make actions because that was something she could do. She had a lot of movement in her and she wanted to move around. So I told her, I can do it. And every time she would see this card, she would think, okay, and then she could say, I can do it. And we did that with every sight word that we were using. Some other things I did, letter recognition, I kind of took a similar approach. I had the letter on the back, but she would first see the picture. And when she saw the picture, we would say snake and try to come up with that this means S. So connecting a visual to the letter. One thing I did with her is I made a lot of books for her, and I learned that for her to see a book and be successful with reading it, she needs to have the words separated from the picture. And I also made sure that when I was making books that I made the words that we were doing in our sight words. So mom was one of them and can was one of them. And this was one of the first books I made. I actually learned that she sees a lot better on yellow paper. So I started making things on yellow paper. And I also made sure the font was large and in a proper font so that the A's were the right types of A's, not the weird computer printed A's. I gave the better books to her at the end of the semester. Then finally, the last thing I want to talk about with her was this letter A down here. When we were trying to trace letters, that was one of the hardest things to do based on her fine motor skills. So she wasn't able to manipulate kind of a pencil in the way that we can as well. So I wanted her to gain muscle memory of the movement of an A. So one way I did this was I printed out these race car track letters, and I gave her a Hot Wheels car, and I started it, and we would go all the way around the A, and every time we would finish, we would say that that is the letter A, and I told her she had to keep the car on the track. Can't ever leave the track. Well, that worked okay, but then I realized even manipulating this was kind of hard for her. So the next day when we did this, I just told her, hold up your finger. And I put a sticker with like a smiley face on her finger. And I told her, okay, you have a person. This is your person. Your person's going to stay on the track. It can never leave. So it was just a lot of tracing and learning what worked best for her. Which is going to bring me into student teaching, which I'll talk pretty briefly about. I'm student teaching at Jocelyn Elementary. And what I realized is tutoring is a whole lot different than whole group classes. And it is very easy to differentiate your instruction for tutoring because you're working with one person, but it's a lot harder when you have 25 students. So one way I did learn to do this, I taught a lesson on the branches of government. And with this lesson, I had a couple different diagrams, organizers that we were going to take information about the branches of government. I'm also in a 4th grade class, so that helps with the background. That's why they're learning about government. The bottom one was what I gave to my lower ability. This doesn't have them write much information. They just get to visualize what's going on. This one I gave to my middle students. It has 3 different leaf area of the tree, and it gives them, though, a guide of where to go. So it tells them what are the responsibilities of the judicial branch, and then what are the positions under the national, the state, and the local. It tells them what they're looking for. Where my higher ability I don't have on here, I gave them basically this, but there's nothing in the leaves. They have to figure it out on their own, and they have to take their own notes. Finally, I'm going to talk about guided reading. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but for guided reading, I think that's the most practical way as a classroom teacher we get to work with our students in a differentiated way because we're working with the abilities at different, where they're actually at. And I'm going to talk about this paper I have here. It is just a poster, kind of, the bottom part's a poster. It has some pictures about ranch and farms. This was for my lower reading group, and my lower reading group was reading a book about ranches and farms, and it's kind of a dull book, and it just told us a lot of information, and it's great for them to learn about, but it's just a lot when you're just reading it, and especially if they're my lower reading group. So it has the pictures that they got a label, and I thought just giving them a visual was important. And then on the back side, I have them flip the back paper over, and I told them to draw one animal that they learned about and what that animal provides us. So if they were going to draw a pig, I told them to draw a piece of bacon with it. Or if they're going to draw a cow, they were going to draw a hamburger, things like that, because that's what our book was talking about. And then for my higher ability, they were using a different book, but I challenged them more by asking them to write their own story using the same genre. We talked more about the comprehension strategy, like that was for the week. But I wanted to talk about my lower ability. Basically, my big idea is that excellent teachers need to know how to meet the needs of their students in order to provide the most effective teaching. In my past 4 years, I've just taken away that as a teacher, I'm going to have to learn to teach things different ways. And then I kind of have to plan for what's not expected, and I have to come up with a lot of ways to do it. It's a lot easier when you're meeting one-on-one with one student. It's a lot more work when you have 25 students, but you have to come up with ways to do that. My conclusion is basically that I know I need to differentiate my instruction, but I know it's a challenge. It's going to be a challenge for me to be able to do that every single day for every lesson that I teach. But basically, the point is to never give up as a teacher, and that as a teacher, the best way I'm going to be a teacher is that if I can understand where my students are at and figure out what their strengths are and build my instruction around that. So thank you for listening to my presentation.